Have you ever wondered how something got to be the way it is? I mean, everyday things. Why is my road called what it is, and why does it go where it does? This week, I've been in London again and noticed a few things I thought you'd like to see. Come on, let's have an explore together. Do you recognize this famous map? I'm sure you do. But unless you really know it well, I'm sure you wouldn't have noticed it's changed quite a bit recently. Actually, it's changed a lot over recent years. While I'm interested in the tube map, since I no longer live in London, I haven't really kept up with all the changes. I assume the reason it was now harder to read was that my eyes were getting old. But in fact, I think there's a lot more on the map than I remember. From a visitor or tourist point of view, the tube map is a horrible representation of London's geography, with some places that are really very close together, looking like they're far apart, while distant suburbs appear to be just walking distance. No real sense of distance is possible with the tube map. While useless geographically, it works wonderfully from a connection point of view. If you know where you are and know where you need to be, even if you have no idea which direction it would be to walk, the map will help you. One thing I did notice that has changed is the central line. That's the red one that runs mostly left to right through the middle of the map. Now, it used to be that it was shown much straighter than it is today, but for various reasons, it now has a kink in it. Most of the tube underground is a bit of a free-for-all, but there are places where the tunnels follow the path of the roads far above them. The central line from Oxford Circus indeed more or less does this for quite some distance. The next stop west is Bond Street, and of course, just to complicate things, that station is right in the middle of Oxford Street. Next on the straight line there is Marble Arch, which sits, as you would expect, right there beside Marble Arch, at the end of Oxford Street. One more station and you arrive at Lancaster Gate. Now, Lancaster Gate is one of the northern entrances to Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens. The station, I suppose, could be called Bayswater Road because it sits right in the middle of Bayswater Road. But it isn't. Remember I asked, have you ever wondered how something got to be the way it is? Well, I was right there the other day and I wondered why it was called Bayswater Road and when it was just a continuation of Oxford Street. Oxford Street doesn't go to Oxford, but Bayswater Road does lead to Bayswater. In that case, why isn't Oxford Street called Bayswater Road too? It's the same road. Now the answer to that question is because. This is England after all, and I don't have time to explain all the wonderful whys behind the whats. Bayswater had quite enough to keep my curiosity busy for one day. Now, Bayswater got its name from somewhere called Bayard's Watering Place, dating back to the late 1300s. By all accounts, it was a really rather lovely place with a particular picturesque river running right through it where horses could get a drink on their way out of the city. The river eventually became Bayswater, but it's better known these days as the River Westbourne. West being its location relative to central London and Bourne being another word for brook or river. Now names are funny things too, aren't they? The River West River. I think I like Bayswater better. Nevertheless, the lovely spot eventually attracted people who weren't called Bayard, and a town grew up around the area. Meanwhile, just a mile or so Downstream, Queen Caroline, wife of King George II, had decided Hyde Park needed a lake, and so in 1730 blocked the path of the river to create what we now call the Serpentine. Moving another mile or so downstream, and about 100 years later or so, railways were starting to become a thing. Also by this time, Bayswater was becoming less of a pretty place to be. Industry and people all used the river for one thing or another, and if you were a horse back then, you certainly wouldn't want to be drinking from it. Chelsea, a rather posh part of town, was much too posh to have trains in its neighbourhood. So the newfangled underground line was run to the north of Chelsea, close to the south of Hyde Park, and it crossed the path of the River Westbourne on its journey to the Thames. Chelsea to this day has no railway station. Since the river was now more of an open sewer than its former picturesque country watering place, it was considered a nuisance rather than an asset. The Serpentine had long begun to stink, and so an alternate source of water was eventually found to feed it, rendering the Westbourne redundant or obsolete. The Westbourne was far too posh a name for the river, so it became known as the Bayswater Sewer for a time. Now, Sloane Square Station had a problem. It was to be built right where the river ran. The Stinky River was in the way and had to go. The river, in fact, is still there today, but few would know it. As you stand on the platforms at Sloane Square, the river runs gurgling through its own culvert high above your head in the green casement there. Since we've journeyed this far together today, I can't help noticing that at one end of the station is a traditional brick arch surrounding the tunnel mouth, while at the other end a rather rugged concrete lintel appears to be holding everything together. But why, I wonder? Well, if you go outside and look at the street, you'll start to understand. The old buildings around the square there stop at the underground station. The station building itself was rebuilt much more recently after being destroyed by a World War II bomb. You can see the old buildings continue further along the street. The bomb fell in November 1940 right through the station ticket hall, destroyed the glass roof that used to cover the whole station, and hit a train that was just leaving the platform. 37 people were killed and more than twice that number injured, but incredibly, the bridge carrying the river was unaffected. These days, the workmanship of those that got the station back into operation in just 6 short weeks is hardly noticed. Our meander along part of the route of the Bayswater or River Westbourne has many stories to tell, I'm sure. From a beautiful watering place to an open sewer is hardly a tale of progress, though. So how did that happen? How did a once lovely stream become so polluted? Surely people knew why the river was getting so messy. Well, of course they did. But remember, what happened upstream flowed downstream and wasn't their problem anymore. The sewage flowed away from the people creating it and into a park they didn't get to visit or care about. Yet further downstream, the mess of a river flowed into the Thames, which before it was dramatically cleaned up in my lifetime, stank. In a sense, selfishness was the cause of the problem. I may create the problem, but it doesn't affect me, so why should I care? As always, doing the right thing is important. Paul reminded us of this long ago. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Paul goes on to say that although Jesus was God, he chose to serve, to take a lowly position so that others would benefit long into the future. Having the same attitude of Christ is a tough one, isn't it? How does that affect the way we treat not only the people around us, but the world we live in, the future? Do we care for God's creation too, or doesn't that count? Well, we've done a good bit of exploring today, haven't we? A lovely walk through a park, a bombed railway station, and a river sealed inside a culvert running over its own bridge. Sewage and selfishness all got into the mix too. In the end, history can teach us a great deal if we're willing to learn from it. Thinking of others instead of just ourselves might even make us a little more careful with the world around us. Until next time, goodbye.